welcome back to Cat Chat Live, Life Between the Hulls. Today we have episode number 5, where I'm once again joined by Bill Regan, our Mid-Atlantic based broker. And, if you've gotten to episode 5, you have a rough idea of what the show's about. But we basically like to talk about what's going on in the catamaran world, what we're seeing as yacht brokers dealing in the catamaran space on a daily basis, and just share, some of our anecdotes, stories, and kind of a little bit of what happens behind the scenes in the conversations that we have. My name's Wiley Sharp, and I'm joined with Bill Regan here.
Hey, thanks, Wiley. Yeah, I'm glad to be back for episode 5. Going well so far. Yeah, like Wiley said, I'm based up here in the Mid-Atlantic, Baltimore, Annapolis region, cover the Chesapeake. But, just last week I was down in Florida, so all up and down the eastern seaboard. Luckily, we have these great things called airplanes. Help our job out a lot. But yeah, I think we should just get right into it.
So the first segment, as you guys know, is life between the hulls, and it's kind of where we just talk about what's going on in our world. And as you mentioned, Bill, that newfangled flying machine, the aeroplane, right from Baltimore down to St. Augustine. And I was just there a couple days before you, checking out some boats, and including that Leopard 48 you just listed. But I don't know, spent some time in St. Augustine. I hadn't been up there in probably 6 or 8 months. And every time I go up there, I'm always impressed with just what a good catamaran hub that town is. I mean, it's a small town, touristy town,
Yeah.
but the infrastructure is quite nice there for catamarans.
Yeah, it's really developed, to kind of accommodate that. I mean, one of the things they've got going too for, transient cruisers is they've got a great mooring field system there with a municipal marina that has dinghy dockage right in the heart of downtown. So you can, do all the tourist stuff from right there. You're right by the big fort there, so sometimes they'll shoot off cannons and stuff like that. So it's a cool place to visit. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of huge municipal mooring fields around. I mean, there's Butte Key Harbor down in Marathon. Annapolis has got some and stuff like that. But it's nice when you can do that kind of thing, save a little bit of money, but also feel good about leaving the boat all day on the mooring there.
Yeah, it's funny. I've got a lot of friends that work in the powerboat space, motor yachts, and all that. And they always view being out at anchor or, out on a mooring ball as what us cheap sailors like doing. And I think it goes way beyond just saving money versus being in a marina. I just think it's there's some social aspects to being in a marina that are nice and enjoyable, but the privacy you get when you're either out at anchor or out on a mooring ball is so much better.
Yeah, for sure. And then you get the breeze flowing through the boat and everything. I mean, just very similar to being an anchor. And with catamarans, I mean, they take up more dock space, so there's only so many you can fit on a dock in a given geographic region, I guess. A lot of that infrastructure in Florida was built back in the 50s and 60s, 70s when 45-foot sport fish were big boats. And beams have gotten exponentially larger in the last 40, 50 years. So
yeah, when you think of the old Morgans and whatnot, like those, the out islands or the old Irwins, those were considered beamy boats in their day. And they were 12, 14-foot beams, if that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that 14-foot kind of standard beam, like the Gemini catamaran used to fit into, so you could fit in that standard, monohull slip. But St. Augustine's, got a lot of good marinas too, some boatyard facilities that can haul pretty large catamarans, up to the 48, 50-foot range of cats. It's good hurricane storage facilities around there, and then just good service providers too.
Yeah, and so, from a facility standpoint, St. Augustine Yachting Center, I mean, I remember the first time I went there, they only had a trailer to pull boats out, and to your point, they've got the big travel lift. And I think the largest cat I saw on the hard there the other day was a Lagoon 560, which is a 32-foot beam boat. So they've got that, and then kind of in that same general area, there's just tons of dockage and marina. And like when I went by your Leopard 48 listing, I knew that the yacht rigger had opened a location in St. Augustine. I just didn't know where it was. And lo and behold, they were right there at that marina. And so I think the quality of work in St. Augustine is, continued to elevate. And, the area or the experts in the space have kind of moved there as well too.
Yeah, for sure. It's, it's become one of those East Coast, little hubs where, you look at places like Fort Lauderdale, Fort Pierce, St. Augustine, and then on up from there. Um, and yeah, I mean, and then you've got the inlet that comes in from the Atlantic there, which, maybe isn't the best inlet in Florida, but it's certainly doable for catamarans in regular settled conditions.
Yeah, I think that area is just going to continue to grow, especially with how expensive it's become in South Florida, and even Fort Pierce, for that matter, is like become a
Yeah.
lot more expensive than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. It's kind of neat seeing these smaller towns that were always kind of stop through transient towns for people going north and south, becoming more of regular yachting centers.
And yeah, I mean, St. Augustine too, it's got that kind of like rarity of uh Florida towns where you can actually like dinghy to shore, leave your dinghy safely and just go walk, and you can go to a bar, you can go to, do a tourist thing, you can go tour the fort, you can take a bus to Publix or whatever it is, and you can come back and, you're not trying to like find an overpass to leave the dinghy, and you wonder if it's going to be there when you get back. And it's just a really nice walkable downtown too, which is something, a lot of Florida's, doesn't have. Once out the coast there, it's a lot of times some sort of freeway or something like that, or the causeway out to the beach or whatever it is. So it's nice to be able to have that kind of thing, similar to what you get more in New England or, Annapolis or something like that, where you're right in the heart of town when you pull up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I like St. Augustine. So, but yeah, it's kind of just a little bit of life between the halls. Both of us were up in St. Augustine for different reasons, and very similar timeline, and it's just kind of fun to refamiliarize myself with it. So, in the last few episodes, we've always featured a make and model as part of one of the segments in the podcast. And Bill had a really great idea for this episode, that instead of focusing specifically on a certain make and model, to focus kind of more on a class of boat. And basically, throughout the pandemic, catamarans became insanely expensive across the range, from the 80-foot boats down to the Lagoon 380s. And what we've seen happen in the last year is a lot of those boats that are kind of in that entry level place in the market space or in the marketplace have fallen back down into reasonable numbers, which would be something under $300,000 catamaran. So you want to just kind of talk about some of the makes and models, Bill, that are good cruising boats, that are affordable cruising catamarans.
Yeah, I mean, there's the big three, Fountaine Pajot, Leopard, Lagoon. Of course, there's other models that are out there, but I think a lot of what we do is in that space, and they've all had a strong presence in that area over the years. So I think with more boats on the market in the last year, also the age of the boats, a lot of them are older now, so you're seeing some price come down that way. So I think there's good options if are looking through there. You want to look for things like standing rigging, replaced, good service to engines, generators, all that stuff. But yeah, some of the models that come to mind. I mean, you mentioned the Lagoon 380, which it's got to be the longest production run of any catamaran model. I mean, they started building that in like 2000, and they just stopped it a couple of years ago. So with very little difference. I mean, the interior kind of scheme changed and stuff like that, but it's kind of the same boat overall. And yeah, seaworthy boat, is a real popular cruiser for a long time. Along those lines, you've got the Leopard 38/39, I'll say, because they're the same hull, some differences between them. We'll get into that a little more later, probably. But yeah, and then the Fountaine Pajots. I mean, they made the Mahi 36, which it's getting on the smaller side for what you can accomplish in a catamaran, because you always want a little bit of hull length there, just
Yeah, the
for seakeeping
36 is
ability.
the Mahi 36 is probably a boat I would never personally consider. I delivered one back from Marsh Harbor to Palm Beach for a haul out for an owner when I was doing yacht deliveries, and it was one of the worst deliveries I've ever been on, and a lot of that had to do with just the waterline and beam not being a great sea boat, but good coastal cruiser, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think like something like that. I've got a soft spot for, the Keys and the Bahamas. I mean, a boat like that where you can get under some bridges, you draw, less than 3 feet, and you can kind of tuck up in some little secluded mangrove islands, and have a place to launch out of, or get real close to the beach and the Avocos or something like that. Get kind of goes off the beaten spots, where you don't see cruising boats go, is especially if you can get into those kind of flatter waters, like on the lee side of the Exumas, or the
Right.
back
Yeah.
country of the Keys, where there's chop and you've got 15 knots of breeze. I mean, you're going to take off in something like that. But I digress.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
there
and
is.
then you just wait for that windless day to cross the Gulf Stream and just motor across. Like, that's what most of us do anyway. So
Yeah, that was the disadvantage of doing it as a delivery, is I had to go on the day I had to go, and it was
yeah,
fun.
right. But yeah, and then up into kind of the 40-foot range too, you start to see these boats, some of the older designs, like the earlier Leopard 40, not the newer one we talked about a few episodes ago, but the one that was Morelli and Melvin design from the mid-aughts, I guess we'd call it now, 2006, 2008 area. Great sailing boat. Yeah, good size accommodations in that one. Lipari 41s, the old Lagoon 39s. I don't know if we've seen them under 300 a little bit here and there
No, but the
lately.
Lagoon 400 though is a lot of those are
Yeah,
falling
sure.
in that sub 300 range, and that's a great layout on that boat as well too. Yeah, I mean, I think like if I were focusing, for Laura and I on a smaller catamaran in that sub 300 range, I think I'd probably focus on like the Morelli and Melvin Leopard 40 or a Lipari 41. Would probably be like the two boats that stand out. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but yeah, and then even some of the older slightly larger boats have come down in that sub 300 range, whether it's the Leopard 46 or the Lagoon 440. I think one of the challenges, though, with some of the larger production boats that have fallen into that sub 300K range is usually when they're in that sub 300K range, they are, ready for new batteries, new solar, new sails, new standing rigging. And so, to your point earlier, Bill, um, the key would be finding maybe one of those smaller models that the previous owner had done the standing rigging because it was due, or added a water maker, done some of those kind of capital expense items to upgrade the boat. And that's where I think you'd find your value.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, if you get the bigger boats, like you say, I mean, you start doing those refit things and all the costs just start creeping up because, it's extra, 5 or 10 feet of, rigging wire and more time and cost involved and all that kind of stuff. So what seems like a good deal, on first glance, when you start really breaking it down, you might be better off looking at one of these cooler, smaller boats that has had some of that work done already. That's more of a turnkey platform. Yeah, there's lots of good options out there. I just did a search, on Boat Wizard, which is like the back end of Yacht World and all that, and kind of North American market under 300,000. Those big three. I mean, there's 42 kind of boats out there, and some of them stretch back to 2003, but there's some that are in the teens. So yeah, it's just a matter of kind of working with somebody who knows the models and can help you weed through which one might be a great option for your particular cruising plans.
Exactly, and that's the key, is working with somebody like yourself that knows the market and is not basing all of their knowledge from social media and cruisers forum.
That's how I learned.
Cruisers forum. I don't even know how to say it. No, I'm just joking. So one of the frequently asked questions that we get pretty much every time, a lot of times on the buying side, because it's somebody's first time going through the process, but we also get it on the listing side as well, is kind of what to expect at survey day. And so I think we'd like to just kind of talk a little bit about what that day looks like, and then also what you should expect as a buyer and as a seller. So you've been through countless surveys, Bill. What does your normal survey day look like from kind of start to finish? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, typically it's a earlier start to the day. You know, Sometime around 8 a.m. Everybody will roll in. Before long before the survey actually happens, though, there's a lot of preparation that's gone into it. Whether that choosing the surveyor, obviously, deciding on any kind of other inspections that might be taking place at the day. Some surveyors don't like to do the rigging inspection as well, whether they don't like going up masts or they don't feel their qualifications encompass that. So you might have to book a rigging company to do that as well. Oil analysis and all that kind of stuff too. And then we've got to, often move the boat to where the survey is going to take place. Some places like in Fort Lauderdale, we might start behind a house where the boat's been docked temporarily or at the marina. But at some point, you're going to have to move to a haul out facility and get into that a little bit. But yeah, like, up here, I've had boats in downtown Baltimore and we've had to move them down to Annapolis to the haul out facility, which is, 5 or 6 hours. So it happens usually the day or 2 days before. So the boat is actually there, and then you start the survey at the marina where it's right next to the haul out facility usually. So yeah, the surveyor, comes in, buyers. Now it's, kind of optional for the sellers. Some sellers want to be involved in that. Some sellers are remote and they've moved on with their lives and, they are relying on us and, a hired captain for the day, to either move the boat down there or to, be there to run the boat during the day for the survey and sea trial. But they're gonna, start in the morning. Surveyors, I think they generally get on board and get a first general impression of the boat. Go through. Everybody's got their own different, process and checklists. But some of the general things, they're going to turn on, different systems throughout the boat. Check shore power operations on bigger, systems like air conditioners and things like that. Look at the engines, take oil level readings. They're going to want to see a cold start on the engine to make sure that it's not, just over revving or weird smokes coming out when it first starts up.
One thing that I always kind of couple points, you had mentioned the whether the seller's there or we hire a captain's kind of up to the seller. I usually dissuade my sellers from being present at survey or try to convince them not to. I've been on so many surveys, as I know you have too, where you watch the way a seller raises their mainsail, for instance. You kind of scratch your head going, man, I've hoisted a lot of mainsails in my life, and you were making that look so much more challenging than it should look. Which can also then put concern into the buyer. But that's just the way they've done it. And I've
Right.
been on boats where the owner's driving the boat, and I'll literally look over at the buyer and say, like, hey, like, that's the hardest way you could possibly do this. Like, I'll explain to you the easy way to do it. So like that's an example. To another reason I try and convince sellers not to attend their survey but to be on standby to answer questions is the surveyor is going to tear their baby apart, right? Like the surveyor is there for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to find deficiencies. He's not there to tell you how beautiful your baby is. He's there to tell you that your baby's got X, Y, and Z going wrong. And I'm sure you've been in this scenario in the past when the seller's present. They'll start arguing with the surveyor over a finding, whatever it is, something simple or a complex finding, and it'll sometimes shift the mood of the surveyor, where
Mhm.
they're just like, this guy's kind of a jerk and doesn't know what he's talking about, and can kind of change the surveyor's mood. And the surveyor's like a home inspector, right? Like they're human beings, they're people, and if they're in a crappy mood, that might it shouldn't, but it might cloud the lens in which they look through things. And so that's kind of the other reason why I always try to dissuade sellers from being there for the survey, but to be available on a call. And then the other thing as well too, and I've learned this over the years, is the surveyor will usually show up. Let's say he'll tell us at 8 o'clock or 8:30. As a buyer, you're so excited, you want to be there, and I'll usually recommend to the buyers like, hey, Mr. Smith, the surveyor is going to be there at 8 o'clock to start going through the boat. We should aim to be there at 8:30. That way, the surveyor's kind of had his quiet time without anybody around, just doing it once around the boat, kind of getting a lay of the land of what's going on. Because if you're already on the boat and the surveyor's showing up, he hasn't had time to put his tool bag down, and you're asking him 100 questions. I've seen him at times kind of almost become a little annoyed in the process because they just want to look at the boat and inspect the boat. They want to get into it and they all have their process. So I always try to get the buyers to show up, 15, 20, 30 minutes after the surveyors had a chance to kind of do a once over. I don't know if that's from your experience helpful or not.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, the surveyors are humans, and you know, they can maybe wear their emotions on their sleeve a little bit more than us brokers. We're always trying to put on the sunny disposition or whatever. But yeah, so I've definitely had surveyors that were very gruff to deal with, and
Yeah.
like, just don't follow me around, kid, kind of thing. Um, and then you've got other guys or gals that are just super friendly and just like, hey, I'm an open book here today. And then I've had surveyors make big deals out of seemingly small items and stuff like that, and some have found some pretty serious faults, but it's like, well, it can be fixed, kind of thing too. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, the I guess, just put yourself in their shoes. It's like, if you're showing up to your job, do you want somebody, always looking over your shoulder asking, 1001 questions right off the get go or something like that. So,
Yeah, that kind of brings up another good segue from the buyer's side. I mean, what should a buyer be doing while the surveyor's actively surveying? And I think you kind of hit a few of the things they shouldn't be doing. But I mean, in my opinion, it's like, and kind of what I coach buyers on is like, hey, ask questions, follow the surveyor around, but don't be peering over his shoulder and going, what's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? Because it actually slows them down and they may not be able to do as detailed a job in certain areas if you're interrupting them every 15 seconds asking them what every little thing is that they're looking at as well. But what do you kind of coach your buyers on, in terms of interacting with the surveyor and involvement in the survey?
yeah, well, I mean, ultimately the surveyor's working for them. They're paying the bill to get the report and everything like that. So yeah, I mean, they should ask questions, about things. You know, Generally it's like, yeah, don't follow the surveyor, so closely. If there's something that they want you to take a look at, go take a look at it. Or, oftentimes if they're down in the, owner's quarters and they've pulled off, a couple of the panels with, to look at the backside of the air conditioner or the ducting or the electrical panel or something, that panel's going to be off for a few minutes. And so once they're done looking in there, go poke around and take a look and stuff like that. And, you know, I'm here as well. I know a thing or two about these boats. So if you got a question about a system or something like that, I'm a resource here as well for you today. So we're not distracting the surveyors. Yeah. And I also find, too, it's a good time, you're on the boat, all day with the buyer. So it is a good time to, as a broker, to not just, kind of sit there checking our email all the time. It's like, okay, let's, take a look around the galley and, see how things work over here. And, or let's look at the switch panel and, explain how these things work and how you switch over to the shore power or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely one of the important value adds at a survey that we can do as brokers is, trying to in more detail explain kind of what's there, how things work, that sort of thing, to help start acclimating them with it. Because it's kind of like you show them the boat the first time, they contract it, they may see it one more time after contracting it prior to survey, so they haven't really dove into the, well, what does that switch do? And during the survey day, that's like a perfect opportunity for us to be like, yeah, when you're switching from shore to generator, you slide this thing, you turn it off, you slide the lockout, flip that breaker, and now you're ready to get your short power, vice versa. And I think that's a great opportunity for us to help begin that learning process of what could potentially be the client's new boat.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so after, a couple hours at the dock in the morning, checking systems, there'll be time to leave the dock, either to, move to the haul out facility, or if you're already at the haul out facility, you're going to go and do the haul out. Like you said, it's usually around noontime for the haul outs because the yards like to put the boat in the slings, let it sit for an hour while the crew goes on lunch, and then they'll put you back in after that. So yeah, I mean, coming into the haul out facility is always, interesting event. I mean, hopefully it's a non-stressful thing. This is another reason, it's nice to have a pro captain on board, somebody, who's doing this thing, kind of day in and day out. obviously owners who've cruised their boats and stuff like that will have been into haul out facilities and stuff before, and they're usually very capable with their boats. Um, but there's always that time where you're coming down that channel at Harbor Town and you got a 90-degree blind turn and there's another big catamaran coming out the other way, and now what do? It's not everybody's prepped for that situation, but captains that are working in Fort Lauderdale have been there and done that.
Yeah, I mean, if you figure the average catamaran gets hauled out, once a year for out of water maintenance, and you own the boat for 3 years, conceivably you've done maybe three haul outs in your term of ownership, four haul outs. But then you take somebody like Calvin as an example, or Andreas, or any of the other good captains, they've done three haul outs that week already, and all of them at that same boatyard. So they know
Right.
exactly, they already know what boats are on the T head when they're making that 90-degree blind turn, and prepped and ready for it. When the boat's out of the water, because I get this question all the time, Bill, when the boat's out of the water, I think a lot of times buyers are surprised at how quick the out of water portion goes. But like, what's the surveyor checking while it's out of the water?
Yeah, so a couple things. I mean, the running equipment, sail drives or shaft drives, if it's that kind of boat. If there's folding props, checking on those operations. Zincs, underwater lights, rudders, which there's a bearing that where the rudder goes through the hull, so they're going to give it a good shake and see. Hopefully, there's no wiggle room there. Keels, any evidence of kind of grounding damage or submerged objects that have been hit. Obviously, the bows and stuff like that too. Condition of the bottom paint, and then they're going to sound the bottom with a hammer. So yeah, I mean, they walk around tapping on it the whole way through. And at that point, they're going to be looking too for blisters and things like that. And whether that's, if it's something's a blister or just, in the paint where there's a little water weeping out or something like that. And then, with the hammer, they're trying to get a nice solid repercussion, sound out of it versus a thud, thud, thud.
There's nothing that stops a conversation of just BSing while the boat's out of the water when you're hearing like snap, 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 thud, thud, thud.
Yeah.
Everybody just is like,
Right.
goes running to see what the surveyor found.
Yep. So, but yeah, I mean, the boat's out of the water, like we said, maybe a little over an hour, by the time the yard crew goes to lunch and, then fires up the travel lift and puts you back in. But yeah, I mean, oftentimes the surveyor's done in a half an hour with that kind of inspection. Depending on the size of the boat, the surveyor, anything they found or something. They'll also, if there's a ladder around, get up on the ladder and maybe do a sounding further up the hull. It's also a good time to, as you walk along the outside edge of the boat, to look up, because you can often see any kind of discrepancies in the gel coat from where there might have been a repair or something like that you can't necessarily see when you're looking level onto it from a dock. So those kinds of things.
Yeah, and then I mean, since we're talking about the haul out portion, I've gotten this question a number of times. Well, if the boat needs a bottom job or it needs the sail drive service, can we just leave it on the hard during the survey, have that work done? And I kind of always answer, well, no, it's not a good idea. If you do that, you don't own the boat, you don't have an agreement to move forward with the boat, and you might be spending money on a boat that may not even be your boat. And then from a scheduling standpoint, that often doesn't work with the boat yards. And
Yeah, exactly. Logistically, it's almost impossible to arrange that because, I mean, someplace like Harbor Town, they have very limited storage space on land. So it's like they're, to line it up, whereas they can haul, multiple boats a day for a short haul, but they can only haul a few a day, for storage because they're resplashing stuff. So it's like their schedule kind of goes out months. So it's like trying to line all that up is near impossible.
yeah, because I'm sure you've gotten that question a bunch over
Yeah.
the years too.
Yep.
All right, so we've gone through the haul out. Lunch is over. As a broker, I think you do the same thing I do. I always make sure to bring either coffee or sandwiches or something because you want to make sure that everybody's fed, and usually that's around the time that we eat pub subs or
Yeah,
whatever
yeah. It's like
we're eating.
Yeah, it's like everybody always forgets to bring like things to the boat, like water. Like I
Yeah.
always show up with a case of water because, especially in Florida, it's a long, hot day and, we don't need anybody passing out.
Yeah, now as a broker, you forget to bring water, once or twice early in your career, and you're like, "Yeah, I'm stopping at Walgreens and getting a case of water on my way to the
Yeah.
boat." Or,
Yeah.
I always just order pub subs online or whatnot, and
Sure.
pick them up in the morning with some chips and whatnot. So the boat goes back in the water, and then kind of what happens from there.
Yeah, then it's usually out for a sea trial at that point. So, depending where you are, that could be, motoring up the ICW to find an inlet to go out to the Atlantic, depending on the weather conditions, of course, too. If it's really, really rough out there, they may opt to do that inside and just raise the sails in the channel. Up in the Chesapeake, it's usually a pretty quick trip out to the bay, or just to a wider portion of the river that you're on, whether that's, the Potomac or, across the way. Yeah, so, the sea trial itself is generally a pretty brief affair. From the surveyor's perspective, they want to make sure, okay, the Genoa furls unfurls furls, everything's running smoothly. Let's look at the condition of the sail. Okay, put it back in. Let's get the main up, make sure that's all running smoothly. Riggings run right. How many reef points are there? What's the condition of the main? Is there mold on it? Dirt, whatever. Bird's nest.
Yeah,
Seen all that kind of stuff. But
I'll
yeah,
never
then
forget we were on a survey on a Leopard 44 a couple years ago, and there's super nice people from Oklahoma that ended up buying the boat, but the main hadn't been open in quite some time, and as it was going up, there was a perfect line of holes in the mainsail.
yeah,
And we're all looking at it going up, going, "Huh, I wonder what's caused that." And in the back of my mind, I'm like, "Oh man, that must have been a bird or a rodent." And so finally, we get to a point, and a mouse came out of the sail bag, scurried along the deck, and eventually jumped into the Dania cutoff canal.
what?
It was that was the only time I've had that one happen.
Yeah.
Uh, so from a seller's standpoint, make sure you raise your sails and check your sails prior to survey.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's, a good segue to, talk about that, like what a seller, should do prior to the boat going to survey. And yeah, I mean, definitely, getting the sails up, if they're the mainsail, spray some of that sail coat McLube stuff on there. This works wonders, to keep that, nice and smooth going. Make sure all the running rigging is run through the proper clutches and has a clear line to go out. Start the engines, even if it's at the dock, and just put them in gear and let them run for a while, and make sure, if you got folding props or whatever, that, they are properly operational at the time. Turn on all the other systems, whether it's air conditioning, obviously your instruments, turn the fridges on, make sure they're working. It's nice to have a fridge on when you start the survey too, because aforementioned, water and pub
Yeah, you got to put the
subs taste
sandwiches.
better if they're in a refrigerator. Um, but yeah, so I mean, kind of just a general systems check, I think, within the week before, going to survey, so that you want it to go as smoothly as possible as a seller, right? You don't want to repeat this, for another buyer if, something's weird about it or it looks harder than it should be. So yeah, just making sure the boat is, smooth and ready to go for a survey.
And so back to the sea trial. I think the one other two other items that the surveyor checks that we haven't touched on yet was they also check the autopilot, make sure that's functioning properly, and then they do a full power test on the motors. And what is the full power test, and kind of why does surveyors do that, or why is it
Yeah, I
important?
mean, so it kind of is what it is. You run the engines up to their max RPMs that they're going to achieve. Generally around the 3,000 to 3,400 RPM range. Yeah, so they're going to look at the engines for any kind of abnormal vibrations. So checking the motor mounts, the belts are spinning properly with that. They're going to take readings at the engine meters, and also most of them are using an infrared heat gun to check the temperature of the engine to make sure there's no overheating issue there. They're going to observe the water flow coming out of the side of the boat from the impeller and the water pump. Also check any weird smoke or anything like that that's coming out of there. So yeah, it's a little weird for, if the seller is there, because they don't usually run the engines up to full speed, almost never, right?
Yeah, the
Um,
last time they did it is when they surveyed the boat to buy it.
yeah. Which, I mean, side note, as a boat owner, I mean, yeah, it is a good idea every once in a while, if you're, on the way back to the dock, whether you went for a day sail or you went out for the weekend, run them up for, 10 minutes or something like that on the way back in. And, it's not bad for the engine, and, diesel engines like to work, and, getting the heat exchanger really pumping through there, it clears out deposits and stuff like that. So, yeah, you don't do it all the time, obviously, but it's, should be achievable without further ado. And but yeah, I mean, part of that full power check too is checking the RPMs where they're at. If it's only getting to 2,800 or something like that, there could be some sort of issue. Is there a prop that's bent weird, or knocking the boat around as a weird vibration or something like that? And, this would be, I guess, if we did a sea trial prior to the haul out, you
Right.
would have
Yeah,
seen that in the haul
exactly.
out. But yeah, I mean, I had a weird one. It was a Leopard 48 back when I worked for the moorings. And took it out for a sea trial, and every time it would go up to, go full power, it would almost right away you start to overheat. Brought it back, a couple times, same thing. Brought it back to the dock. They ended up pulling the heat exchangers off this boat, flushing them on the bench, putting them back on, go out again. It's the same thing.
Oh, that's
And
weird.
yeah, a few trial and error things later, they found out it was the rubber boots that go, where the sail drive comes out of the
Yeah,
bottom of the
yeah, yeah.
catamaran. They were disbonded on the front of it, and as the boat picked up speed, it pushed the rubber boot down over the sail drive and blocked the water intake.
Dude, that's something I've never heard before. That's
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, how you
So
figure that one out?
yeah, I mean, there was a couple, trial and error things to figure that out, but it was the weirdest thing. And then, they pulled the boots off, and yeah, worked fine, as it should,
That's
because the heat
yeah.
exchangers were just flush too. So the buyer got a heat exchanger flush as part of that deal.
Yeah, and some new hull trim.
Yeah, but yeah, so I mean, those are kind of the major points that they want to check, with the make sure the engines, do operate within spec.
And then, so the sea trial's done. Usually, that's either going back to the marina slip or the home it's docked behind or whatnot. And then the surveyor just kind of finishes up any other odds and ends he hasn't done, and like that sort of thing. Correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it depends, like we said, with the if the surveyor's going up the mast, I mean, either on the way back to the dock or when they reach the dock is probably the time they're going to do that. Luckily, almost all the catamarans have electric winches now.
Thank goodness, man. Jeez.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's usually a pretty simple matter. Surveyors that do it of going up the mast all the time, so they have their systems. So yeah.
And then, kind of like once the surveyor's done, not all surveyors do this. It's something I always try to get the surveyors to do, though, and that's to just kind of sit down and do a debrief from the day as well, too. And just like a rig inspection, not all surveyors are keen on doing that, but most of the good ones, or pretty much all the good ones, are willing to sit down and have a 20-minute chat, uh, and just go through their rough notes. And those rough notes that they take are ultimately what ends up in the findings and recommendations in the survey report. And to me, from a buyer standpoint and a broker standpoint for that matter, that's almost the most important part of the day. Like you've gone through everything, so you have a rough idea of what's going on. But then that's like the point in time where you can like really ask the surveyor questions like, okay, so the port engine overheated at the full power test. Why do you think it overheated? Well, it probably overheated because the heat exchanger needs to be serviced, and the exhaust elbow is old looking, which means it's probably got a lot of buildup, which is restricting flow, or whatever. It's just the best time to ask the questions of what's ultimately going to be in that report as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it takes away some of the anticipation of waiting for the report too. It's like, okay, there might be some other things that, that were further back in their notes, or they took a picture of during the day to remind themselves that. But yeah, it's a nice way to go through those, top 10 or 15 maybe findings, and just kind of discuss them, broker, buyers, surveyor, and kind of little
So,
candid discussion about that.
so before we move into the last segment, I've got, I guess, going off script or throwing this one out there. So, from your experience doing this as long as you have, what are the most common things that come up at survey on a catamaran? I already have my list in the head, and I'm sure it overlaps with yours.
um, I mean, a lot of times there's, something with an engine, whether, it's an overheating or, I've had engines that, when they have gotten waterlocked, after being splashed down where they've, we've had to refill them with water or something through the seawater strainer inside the engine room. A lot of this stuff, hopefully, broker is proactive and gets involved in trying to, troubleshoot some of this stuff, because some of this stuff is, a lot of times from a boat, maybe that didn't get a full, go through by the seller before it went to survey, or hadn't been out in 3 or 4 months or 6 months or whatever it was. So there's, some of those little hiccups like that. A lot of times something with the running rigging, whether, it's run wrong or the halyard's too short or something like that. And people just live with it all these years. Yeah, air conditioners sometimes, again, if they haven't been going, maybe they, have a clog in the sea strainer or something like that, just because they haven't run in a little while, and you get some sort of high pressure alarm or something like that. But, those things are usually very quick fixes that sometimes can be done that same day. What do you
Yeah,
think?
no, those are all like, yeah, part of from a seller standpoint. Like, if you go run the boat or do a systems check prior to survey, you can get in front of them because it's like lack of use. And then the things that always jump out at mind, and I always joke with the surveyor if they don't come back is this, but fire extinguishers are always out of date. Life raft is
Life raft.
always out of date.
Yeah.
At least one of the two sail drive seacocks is going to be seized in the open position,
Yeah.
and there may or may not be water in one of the sail drives. And then rudder bearings are another, fairly common item that come up as needing replacement as well too. But I think those, through what you said, as well as those few items, I feel like those come, any number of those come up on 80% of the surveys we go through.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, off the cuff, you got any like weird things you've had to do on a survey to get things moving, like with the boat?
Okay, yeah, no. So Joe Buxton had an Impanema 58 that we went to survey on. This was like during the pandemic. So it was myself, the buyer's wife, and Dominic was the one running the boat. And so I was acting, deckhand on that. And we were coming back in from the sea trial, and it was a little sporty outside, and I didn't properly check to make sure that the dock lines were secured. And so we're coming under the 17th Street Bridge, and all of a sudden I think it was the starboard motor just kind of did that, like, stutter to stop
Yeah.
kind of deal. And I go run back there. I look at it. I knew exactly what had happened. Dominic laid the boat up on the Pier 66 fuel dock because it was empty, and we all kind of sat there in the back of the boat, looked at it, and it was like, well, Wiley, you're the one that screwed it up. What are you going to do about it? And I'm like, I guess I'm getting in my underwear and jumping in the water and cutting the line off. And yeah, yeah, that was a fun one.
Oh, yeah.
And then the boat didn't end up going to close because it got struck by lightning 3 days before closing. So that boat was probably cursed to begin with.
Yeah, seems like.
But yeah, that was one that jumps out to mind. But yeah, I mean, if anybody, either watching this on YouTube or listening on Apple or Spotify, if there's ever any questions you have about, what to expect at survey, give either Bill or I a call. I mean, we've been through countless surveys. It's, from when you're buying a boat or selling it for that matter, you go through, most of our clients go through two surveys in their catamaran career, when they buy the boat and when they sell the boat. And we go through quite a few of them, and have seen it all. And so, just call us or text or email with any questions you have about what to expect on survey. And so the final segment is always broker pick of the week. And since this week we didn't really feature a specific make and model, more of kind of a class of boat, we're also not going to feature a specific boat. So for this week, we're going to talk about our broker pick of the week in terms of make and model that you can purchase and get out sailing on for under $300,000. So Bill, I'll let you jump into it. And, what would you and Trish buy if you were looking for a catamaran under $300,000 to go sailing with the family?
Yeah, I would look at like a Leopard 38/39, I think. The 38 came out first, like 2009, 10. That boat often didn't come with a generator. The coach roof over the cockpit was raised up a bit to give like an air gap between the main structure of the boat back. And so the davit switch is a bit higher, not a problem for me. But and then Austin in that boat came in a 4 cabin configuration versus the 3 cabin. And it also only had a soft top over the helm as opposed to the hard top that Leopard went to later. So that was out, the Leopard 38, for about a year and a half or so. And then they came up with the 39, which used the same molds for the hull. So this has the nice stepped holes with the narrower surface below the water line. 39 you often find as an owner's version. They
Even
lowered
even
that.
in an ex charter boat, they're
Even
common.
an ex-charter
Yeah.
boat, yeah, yeah. They lowered that aft coach roof over the cockpit to make one seamless transition. And then they put a big hatch in there to open up to let some air flow into the cockpit as well. And a lot of times those boats came with a generator. But yeah, I mean they're good sailing boats. They're really seaworthy. There's a video out there we should link in the comments below. It's called "Sailing the Southern Ocean," and
Yeah.
it's when that 39 came out, they were delivering it from Cape Town to Australia, across the Southern Ocean. And it's, of course, it's a crew of South Africans. I mean, they're the only
They're
people that do
crazy to
something
begin
like
with.
that. Yeah, yeah. But they're out there, and like their laundry's hanging up in the cockpit and they're under bear poles. And, there's 35, 40-foot seas behind them, just going downwind, bear poles, some drogues out. They're just having a great time, probably making another cup of tea or whatever in there. And, so I mean, these boats are, they're going to go more places than I'm ever going to want to go. Like, I'll
Right.
put it
Yeah.
that way, like I want to go to the Bahamas and
Yeah,
maybe down to Grenada,
exactly.
but yeah, I mean, it's a, nice salon layout. I do like this boat, versus like the older, like Leopard 40, that the Morelli and Melvin design, because that had the more that sloped coach roof.
Right.
So for me being over 6 foot, I've got headroom almost all the way forward in the salon. It's easy to get around the U-shaped table. There's a U-shaped galley, which is super functional, lots of storage space in there. Could have a real nice owner's suite. 4 cabin boat too. I mean, it doesn't seem, too bad on this size boat. Even if that, like on the port hull would be the guest accommodations with 2 cabins, or if it's the 4 cabin, it's a mirror image. But you do have a separate shower in there. It's shared between the 2 bedrooms. But if you're a family cruising, that's not a big deal. And then yeah, the cockpit is a great layout. You've got a big cockpit table. You sit 8 around there pretty easily. Typical kind of Leopard helm configuration right there, just a few steps up. Good visibility all around. Put a little bowsprit and nice code 0 on that. Be a great sailing boat. So yeah, I think that'd be a great choice in that kind of price point and class.
Yeah, and I would say too, like the 39 over the 38 because of those small changes they made, but like
Mhm.
really really important changes as
Yeah.
well too.
And what's nice too is, versus the older generation, like the M&M 40, you do have the more modern Leopard davit system, which is the best davit system on a catamaran. I'll just say that. Just with that rocker switch at low, raising those stainless bars, and you're in and out of the dinghy all the time when you're cruising. So it's just nice to be able to get it up easily, not have to crank a winch or
Right, you don't even
wrap
think about it.
anything
You're
on
like,
a
okay,
winch.
we're gonna pull the dinghy out. It's not like, oh, got to crank it up like you did on the old Morelli and Melvin 40, which
Right.
is a killer boat. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say for me, and this is probably partially based because I'm helping like clients that owned a Leopard 38, 10 years ago is when they bought that boat, or almost 10 years ago. But they're looking for a Fountaine Pajot Lavezzi 41. And so I've been spending a lot of time looking at those both online and in the flesh. And with those boats coming down below the 300K mark, I think that they offer a lot of boat. I mean, they didn't build as many of those as they did with like the Leopard 39 as an example, but there's still quite a few of them out there. And because of Fountaine Pajot's business model, they didn't necessarily have the same percentage of the hull run, production run that went into charter. A lot of them were, built and sold as private boats, and so that's kind of a nice thing there. But I think the layout of the cockpit into the salon is really quite nice, and the helm arrangement is a very comfortable helm arrangement. I will say the one negative to that boat is the bimini top. It's a soft bimini top over the helm. But you just kind of like, it is what it is, right? You're not going to put a hard top on that boat. But generally speaking, it's a good sailing boat. It's got good load carrying capacity, and you can find them at a very reasonable price. I mean, yeah, of the ones we've looked at, for these specific buyers, it's been quite a few options from 300 ask to $240,000 ask. So some pretty good availability there as well. I do like that old Morelli and Melvin Leopard 40 though. Like, I don't know if I would
Yeah.
buy one, but that was one of the most fun boats to sail.
Yeah, good sailing boat. Yeah. So, and then some people have modified those to have more of a like solar arch and done away with the old davits and put new
Right.
davits on that kind of thing too. So I mean, all right, I'm changing my answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, I might be changing mine as well. I mean, I remember sailing a Leopard 40 on a delivery, and like, granted, we were in the Gulf Stream, but we were surfing down waves hitting like 14 and a half knots. And it's like, I mean, the boat just felt so freaking good, just like,
Yeah, yeah,
just tracked beautifully.
yeah,
So, but yeah, I think, whether it's the Leopard 38, 39, Lavezzi 41, Leopard 40, I think regardless of which route, somebody chooses to go, I think they're going to be happy no matter which one they go. And it's more important to get out there and go do it than to,
yeah.
sit back
And
and
there's just some great options out there in that space right now. So,
for sure. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening to episode number 5 with Bill and I today on Cat Chat Live, Life Between the Hulls. We want to keep growing this show and really making it about y'all, and what you guys want to learn, what you all want to hear us talking about. So definitely shoot us an email, leave a comment, on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And, we would love to talk about the topics that you guys want to hear about. So thanks again. And I hope everybody has a great weekend.
next time.